Devotees. Ah, glorious assembled devotees. Ah, glorious assembled devotees. Glorious to Shri Guru and Gauranga. Day Saraswati Devi Gauravani Chini Nirvasesha Shrunivadi Pascharya. So we're reading from the Śrimad Bhāgavatam, Canto 3, entitled The Status Quo, Chapter 16, Jai and Vijay, cursed by the sages. We're on text number 10. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Thank you. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So we'll go through the words. Ye me tanuhu dvijavarana duhatihi madiha bhutani alabda sharani. Let's say that. Let's see, alabda sharanani sha bedabudya drakshanti agha shata drishaha hi ahi manyavaha tan Gridraha Rusha Mama Kushanti Adidandanetu Ye me tanur drijavaran duhatir madhya. Bhutanya labda sharanani chabeda budya. Drakshantyaga shatadrisho yahi manyavasthan. Let's try that one again. Drakshantyaga shatadrisho yahi manyavasthan. So when they end in Y, you sort of tack the Y onto the beginning of the next one. Otherwise, you get an extra syllable and it doesn't fit in the meter. That's all. It's a trick. Okay. Kridra Rushamama Kushant Yadi Dandanetu. Ye me tanurdrijavarandu hatir madhya. Bhutanya labda sharanani cha beda budya. Drakshyantia gasha tadrisho yahi manyavastan. Gridra rusha mama kushantyadi dandanetu. Ye me tanurdri javarandu hatir madhya. Bhutanya labda sharanani chabeda budya. Drakshantya gasha tadrisho yahi manyavastan. Gridra rusha mama kushantyadi danda netu. Okay, it's your turn. You want to try it? What's that? Eme tanudri javarandu atir madhya. Bhutanya labda sharanani chabeda budya. Rakshatya gadus vishohya himanya vastan. Vedragusha mama kushant yadi dandra netu. Shishirada Govinda ki jai. So you want to try chanting it, Ryan, or want to give it a shot? Okay. Okay. Me tanudri javarandu atir madhya. Bhutanya labda sharanani chabeda budya. Drakshasyantyāga kṣata yahi vastan. Ye me tanudri javarandu hatir madhya. Bhutanya labda sharanani chabeda budya. Shanya gasha tadrisho yahi manya vastan. Dragusha makushantyadi dandanetu. Yea, which persons may my tanuhu body, Dvijavaran, the best of the brahmanas, Duatihi, cows, Madiha, relating to me, Bhutani, living entities, Alabda, Sharanani, defenseless, Cha, and Bedabudya, considering as different, Drakshyanti, see, Agha, by sin, Shata is impaired, Krishaha, whose faculty of judgment, he, because, he, like a snake, Manyavaha, angry, Tan, those same persons, Gridhra, the vulture-like messengers, Rusha, angrily, Mama, my, Kushanti, tear, Adidandane too, of the superintendent of punishment, Yamaraj. Translation. So this is Lord Vishnu speaking to both the Kumars and Jai and Vijay, and Vaikuntha, the spiritual realm. The brahmanas, the cows, and the defenseless creatures are my own body. Those whose faculty of judgment has been impaired by their own sin look upon these as distinct from me. They are just like furious serpents, and they are angrily torn apart by the bills of the vulture-like messengers of Yamaraj, the superintendent of sinful persons. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. The defenseless creatures, according to Brahma Samhita, are the cows, brahmanas, women, children, and old men. Of these five, the brahmanas and cows are especially mentioned in this verse because the Lord is always anxious about the benefit of the brahmanas and the cows and is prayed to in this way. The Lord especially instructs, therefore, that no one should be envious of these five, especially the cows and the brahmanas. In some of the Bhagavatam readings, the word duhitri is used instead of duhati, but in either case the meaning is the same. Duhati means cow, and duhitri can also be used to mean cow because the cow is supposed to be the daughter of the sun god. So that word duhitra means daughter. Just as children are taken care of by the parents, women as a class should be taken care of by the father, husband, or grown-up son. Those who are helpless must be taken care of by their respective guardians. Otherwise, the guardians will be subjected to the punishment of Yamaraj, who is appointed by the Lord to supervise the activities of sinful living creatures. Assistants or messengers of Yamaraj are likened here to vultures, and those who do not execute their respective duties in protecting their wards are compared to serpents. Vultures deal very seriously with serpents, and similarly the messengers will deal very seriously with neglectful guardians. Om Jnana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Vasai Bhulale Shmide Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namani Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Bajayani Nivasesh Shunyavadi Pastati Adishtari Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhaktivinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vanchakalpatubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Vivacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. So we'll go through the purport and talk about some of the different points that Srila Prabhupada makes. The first thing we learn is that there are 5 kinds of defenseless creatures: cows, brahmanas, women, children, and old men. So protecting people is very much a part of the Vedic culture. Some people are given special protection because they are considered weaker in some kind of way or easily exploited. The responsible people are supposed to help take care of these people. Well, usually a little later. Is it okay? usually we have questions a little later. Let me just go through the whole purport, and then we can. Of these five, the brahmanas and cows are especially mentioned in this verse, because the Lord is always anxious about the benefit of the brahmanas and the cows, and is prayed to in that way. So that's also a common theme in the Vedic literature. There's one verse that we chant when we offer food to Krishna. Namo Brahmanaya Devaya Go Brahmano Taya Cha Jagatitaya Krishna Govindaya Namo Namaha. So that verse talks about Namo Brahmanaya Devaya Go Brahmano Taya Cha. Go means cow and Brahmana means the Brahmanas. Hitaya means Hita means to benefit. So the Lord is always looking to the benefit of the cows and the brahmanas. And why the brahmanas? Because the brahmanas are the representatives of the Supreme Lord. They study the revealed literature, and they understand the Lord's instructions, and it's their duty to Chandrasekhar Swami ki jai, it's the duty of the brahmanas to understand the Lord's instructions in the revealed literature and share them with the members of human society. And therefore, they're the representatives of Krishna. And Krishna only comes here very periodically. He comes here in every millennium, and he comes in different Leela incarnations. But most of the time, he's executing his will through the brahmanas. He's enlightening human society through the brahmanas. The brahmanas would study the Vedic literature. Actually, Vedic literature is not understandable by persons who are not situated in the mode of goodness. People who are situated in the modes of passion and ignorance, if they read the Vedic literature, they'll tend to misinterpret it according to their limited understanding. It's just there's different understandings in the modes of material nature. It's described in the Bhagavad Gita that a person in the mode of goodness, he knows what is to be done, he knows what is not to be done, he knows what is to be feared, he knows what is not to be feared, he knows what is binding, and he knows what is liberating. But the person in the mode of passion, he's not clear what to do and what not to do. And the person in the mode of ignorance does the opposite of what he should do. Whatever is good for his spiritual life, he spontaneously is inclined to do just the opposite of that. So unless one's actually situated in the mode of goodness, they won't actually be able to properly understand the Vedic literature. So the brahmanas are defined as being situated in this mode of goodness, and they have different qualities which are mentioned in Bhagavad Gita. 1842, samadhamma tapasocham shantim arjavam evacha jnana-vijnanam astikyam brahmakarmas svabhavajam. So samadhamma tapasocham, sama is peacefulness, dhamma is sense control, tapa is austerity, socham is purity. Samadhamma tapasocham shantira arjavam evacha. Shantira is tolerance. Arjava is honesty, and then jnana is knowledge, vijnana is realization, and astikam is religiousness. So somebody who has these qualities is a brahmana. Now there's a problem in India that in the course of time the understanding of what a brahmana has became degraded, and one is considered a brahmana if he's born in a family of brahmanas. So Prabhupada makes the point that that's contrary to the scripture, and it doesn't make a bit of sense actually, because it's just as stupid as if your father is a doctor to say that you're automatically a doctor. Maybe you've never gone to medical school, you've never worked as an intern, you never got certified, never got a degree, but you can start practicing medicine because your father's a doctor. You know? It's a crazy idea. So that idea came about because the people wanted to get the prestige of being a Brahmana without actually doing the work of being a Brahmana, because people in the age of Kali are lazy. And so that's an important point, actually, that we should understand, because people see us as part of the Hindu tradition, and people have heard that there's this caste system, where people are born into a certain section of society and they can't get out of that section because they're born into it. But that's not actually a fact. Krishna actually describes in Bhagavad Gita 4:13, Chaturvarnya Maya Shrista Guna Karma Vibhagashaha, that he's created these four divisions, Guna Karma Vibhagashaha, by quality and by work. And he lists in Bhagavad Gita the qualities of the two higher classes, the Kshatriyas and the Brahmanas, and the work of the two lower classes, the Shudras and the Vaishyas. So we just listed the qualities of the Brahmana. So these people are situated in the mode of goodness, and they study the Vedic literature, and then they teach it to the people in general, and therefore they can understand it because they won't misinterpret it, because the Brahmanas will make sure they understand it the right way. And that way human society becomes enlightened. Therefore the Brahmanas are very, very important to the Lord, because they're educating the whole human society on behalf of the Lord. And the cows are important to the Lord for different reasons. One is because he's a cowherd boy, and that's his service, is to take care of cows. And also the cows, the products of the cows are used in a lot of religious ceremonies. Like we offer these ghee lamps to the deity, and the ghee comes from the butter, which comes from the cows, which comes from the cream, which comes from the milk, which comes from the cows. So the cows are very important to the whole practice of religion. And religion is what the Lord is teaching, because if people follow religious principles perfectly, they will attain the spiritual kingdom, and they will have a life which is eternal, full of bliss and knowledge. And just as an ordinary father wants the best for his sons, so the Supreme Father, the Supreme Lord, wants the best for all living entities. And the best thing is to leave the material world and live in the spiritual world, which is eternal, full of bliss and knowledge. And there's many, many places where Krishna talks about in Bhagavad Gita, there's many verses that end, Tato yanti param gatim, and they attain the supreme destination, or Tato yati param gatim, or he attains the supreme destination. Krishna wants people to go to this supreme destination. So because the Brahmanas are teaching people how to go to the supreme destination, they're very dear. So then the other defenseless creatures that are mentioned are the women, the children, and the old men. So the women, as it says later in the purport, in the Vedic culture, are taken care of by the father, the husband, or the grown-up sons. And the reason for this is there's always a class of unscrupulous men who exploit women. And if they're not taken care of by responsible men, then they'll be exploited by irresponsible men. So for the protection of the women, men were trained up to take care of them in three different ways: as a father, as a husband, or as a grown-up son. And in that way they wouldn't be left free to be exploited by unscrupulous men. And then the children, they're naturally taken care of by the parents, of course, or the teachers. And it's even in this society, if the parents don't take care of their children properly, it's considered a crime, and you can actually be punished for that. And then the old men. So the old men are also, they're taken care of generally by their offspring, the sons or daughters, and their other family members. And people trained up in the Vedic culture understand that they're supposed to take care of these different kinds of defenseless creatures, and if they don't, the Lord is giving some knowledge about what will happen to them in the future. It's interesting, the verse says, the Brahmanas, the cows, defenseless creatures, are my own body. Those whose faculty of judgment has been impaired by their own sin look upon these as distinct from me. So I've been reviewing in my own study, chapter 4, Bhagavad Gita, and there's this verse that goes, let's see, Yajgyat vana punarmoham evam yasyasi pandava yena bhutanya sheshani drakshas yatmanya tomai. So it's interesting, in the Sanskrit there's this word here, drakshyanti, and in that verse there's, which means they see. And in this verse I was just quoting from the Gita, there's this word drakshyasi, which means you will see, but it's the same word. So that verse from the Bhagavad Gita says that one who's enlightened with this knowledge, he sees that all living beings are part of me and they are mine. And we don't talk about that verse very much, but the significance of that verse is it follows the previous verse, which many of you know, which I actually memorized when I was a Bhakta in 1979 in 55th Street. Tadvidi pranipatena pariprajnena sevaya upadekshanti te gyanam gyaninas tatvadarshana. That Krishna says that one should try to learn the truth by approaching a spiritual master. One should inquire from him. Submissively render service unto him, and the self-realized souls can impart knowledge unto you because they've seen the truth. So what is that knowledge that you're supposed to get from the Guru? That's told in this next verse. Yajgyat vana punarmoham. It says that once you get this knowledge, you'll never fall into illusion. Yajgyat vana punarmoham. Evam yasasi pandava. And then it goes on to say that by that knowledge you will see that every living being is part of me and that they're actually mine. So every being is actually part of the Supreme Being, and therefore when we're hurting another living being, we're hurting part of Krishna. And Krishna is not happy about that. So he provides, through the law of karma, different punishments for people who cause trouble to others. And basically the law of karma is sort of a mechanical system whereby people who cause trouble to others are punished, or people who benefit others are rewarded. So here it says how they'll be punished. They're just like fierce serpents, and they're angrily torn apart by the bills of the vulture-like messengers of Yamaraj, the superintendent of sinful persons. So this is just a brief summary of the punishment. It doesn't go into elaborate detail. So the idea that there's a negative reinforcement for activities that cause trouble to others. And Yamaraj is a demigod who is in charge of the prison department or the punishment department, the correction department. So another question could be, well, how do we escape this punishment? If we, there's a nice verse actually in the word aga here, meaning sin, actually by sin, reminded me of another verse which is in the Śrimad Bhāgavatam, Canto 6, Chapter 2, Text 14. which is Sanketam Parihasam Va Stobam Helam Eva Va Vakunta Nama Gra Nama Sheshagam Asheshagam Aham Ridu. So that verse says, if one chants the holy name of the Lord to indicate something else, jokingly, for musical entertainment, or even derisively or in a critical way, such a person is freed from unlimited sins. Asheshagam means, Ashesha means unlimited. Shesha means end, and Ashesha means without end. So even if your sins are without end, you can be freed from them by chanting the holy name, even to indicate something else, even as a joke, even for musical entertainment, or even in a negative way. So it's a problem that people don't know their duties as to protect these 5 classes of innocent people, and they don't know that they're subject of punishment, and they don't know that they can easily become free from punishment by chanting the holy name. And then after that point, if they properly take care of the 5 defenseless creatures, then they'll be in a very good situation. So the cows are not really taken care of very nicely in the society, because in India, traditionally, after the cows would stop giving milk, they would continue to maintain the cows and let them live out their lives. But in this demoniac society, after the milk production drops a certain point, it's no longer profitable to maintain the cow. So they decide the best thing they can do is to kill the cow and then sell the meat of the cow. And this way they can maintain their wealth. So they're completely unaware of the fact that they're going to have to suffer piteously in the future for all the cows that they're killing. And Prabhupada would make the point that this mass slaughter of cows is a cause of the fact that there's always some war on the planet, and always people are being killed in the wars. And because as a reaction to all the killing they're doing of the cows, he would see the cows being taken to the slaughterhouse, and the soldiers would be taken off to war, and make the connection. So we can learn from this verse about these 5 classes of people, and we can make sure we don't exploit them, but rather we protect them. And of course, there's one is absolved of all social duties if one becomes a pure devotee of the Supreme Lord, which is another point that could be made. If you 100% surrender to Krishna, then you've paid all your debts to everyone. Of course, that's very rarely attained, because it's hard for a conditioned soul to 100% of the time act according to Krishna's direction. But if we can completely surrender to Krishna, as he says, Sarvadharma Prachaja Mame Kam Saranam Vrajaham Tvam Sarva Papebhyo Moksha Yishami Masucha. Abandon all varieties of religion, just surrender unto me. I will protect you from all sinful reactions. Do not fear. So those are a few thoughts on this class, this verse and this purport. Does anybody have any questions, comments, realizations? I guess you had a previous question, so we'll let you go first. He asked me a question after I'd spoken one sentence. Yeah. You're going to be on YouTube, so just be careful.
You kind of already answered it.
Mm-hmm.
About how much responsibility children have to take care of their parents and how that relates to one's own personal spiritual journey. Like, for example, becoming a renunciate or something.
Right.
Because I wanted to say I don't know if you've ever heard of Trilanga Swami, this famous saint who took care of his mother for 40 years until she died before going off and doing his sadhana.
Mm.
So is there any Vedic prescriptions about that?
Well, it's in the standard course of events that the children are supposed to take care of their parents, and then there's that verse that if one's completely surrendered to the Supreme Lord, all debts are paid. So those two things are working. So so if you're not completely surrendered unto the Lord and you don't take care of your parents, then you're in deep trouble. And I know different devotees like several different devotees who've taken care of their parents in different ways. I was living in Alachua for many years, and both my friends Pushkar Prabhu and Pusharta Prabhu, who were Prabhupada disciples, who were family men, they would have their mothers come and live with them when they were, older, and it was difficult to take care of themselves. They came to live with them. And then there's different stories of different, I think Keshava Bharati Maharaj went to take care of his mother for some time before she left this world. I'm not really sure for how long. It wasn't 4 years, I know. I think it was several months. And it's an issue that I'm dealing with too, because my sister's partner gets on my case for not taking care of my mother as much as my sister and he are. And I said, well, I'm not, you're living in the same town as my mother, and I'm living in New York, Paris, and Florida. If I was living in the same town, I would be taking care of them as much as you are. But that wasn't good enough for them, so I'm working on a response. But I do take care of her from time to time. I took care of her on Wednesday, September 21st, actually, when I was going from Syracuse to Philadelphia. I stopped in Albany and took care of her for the day. And I've taken care of her for like a week or two. So, yeah, it's important. We should have, because the idea is that our parents take care of us when, so we're indebted to them. And I took, actually, the main way we take care of people, of course, is we take care of their soul. So, with my mother, she likes to travel, and one time she was writing me how she went to the Galapagos Islands, So the Galapagos Islands, they're famous because Darwin, analyzed the species of finches there and was using it as material for his theory of evolution. So I was completely outraged that my mother went to the place of pilgrimage for the Darwinists. It was like unthinkable for me. And she was like 80 years old, and she took the trouble to go to this. So I thought, she should go to the place of pilgrimage for the devotees. So I invited her to go to Mayapur. So she actually went to Mayapur. So if you read the Navadvipta Mahatmya, if you go to Mayapur, you can attain the kingdom of God, you can attain love of God, you can attain everything. So So I haven't taken care of my mother's body as much as my other relatives. But there's a word for son which means putra. It comes from two words, put, which means hell, and tra, which means to deliver. So the idea is that the son is supposed to deliver his relatives from hell. So I told by performing some spiritual service for them after they leave this body, at the very least, if not otherwise. So I was telling this Swami named Bhakti-Vaibhava Swami, who's originally from Germany, does a lot of preaching in Czech Republic and a few other places. I saw him in Poland, I think at the farm, and we were driving from the Polish farm, I think, to maybe the Prague Rath Yatra or something. Yeah. I was just there this year, actually. The Wrocław Rath Yatra was on one day, and in Poland, and the Prague Rath Yatra was the next day. So I stayed overnight at the farm, and the people were inspired enough to drive me to the Rath Yatra the next day. So I was at this Polish farm of this Bhakti-Vaibhava Swami, and I told him how I took my mother to Mayapur when she was 82 years old. And he said, "You are the real putra. There isn't anything better. There isn't anything better you could have done for her." So, also the Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said if you become a devotee of the Supreme Lord, you benefit different numbers of generations of your family members. So I think it must be in that book, Sri Bhaktisiddhanta Vaibhava, the 3-volume book that the Bhakti Vikas Swami wrote. I was a proofreader for that book, so I got to read it before it came out. So he said that if you're a neophyte devotee, you liberate 3 generations of your forefathers. If you're a madhyama, you liberate 14 generations. And if you're an uttama, you liberate 100 generations. So we actually only need to be a kanishta to benefit 3 generations of our families. So that's something to be considered. So, is that okay?
That's a good answer, thank you.
Swamiji, do you have any additions to make to the class, or questions or comments?
Well, it was an interesting class here today. We're talking about protection, and we're talking about parents. This question came up. I was talking about yesterday to Sunanda and our Deva Damodar. We were talking about various things, and the topic came up about my mother, that my mother never liked Krishna consciousness. She had a very bad opinion about it. And that made it very difficult for me to visit my mother, because whenever I would go there, we would have long, drawn-out arguments. Or alternatively, there was an icy silence. And I don't know which of the two was worse. But it went like that for a number of years, and I couldn't bear to spend any more than a day with my mother. My sister was mellow, but my mother was really negative. And then over time, my mother developed Alzheimer's. And after developing Alzheimer's, she wasn't really able to live alone, because weird things would happen. She would call my sister up. My sister works, and if she couldn't get my sister on the third or fourth ring, she would report my sister as a missing person to the police department. And after a while, it got out of hand. So my sister had to take her to a home where they dealt with people who have Alzheimer's issues. They don't know how to deal with regular everyday things,
Right.
and they might just walk off and wander into who knows where. So that went on for some time, and then I went to visit my mother. And what was interesting was that now, after having Alzheimer's for some time, she didn't know who I was, but she liked me.
Wow.
Which was an interesting switch, My mother was under the misconception that my sister was her sister, even though she was actually her daughter.
Wow.
But, she spent a lot of time with my sister, but she always thought of my sister as her sister instead of her daughter. And she didn't have any idea who I was. And then, as we were saying, that the last time I saw my mother in a conscious state was when I went to leave, and my mother grabbed my hand before I left and said, oh, it was so nice to have met you. And I thought, it was one of those kind of comments that was strangely inappropriate, but strangely appropriate on a certain, very sort of mystical level, that we are like, sojourners on a great cosmic journey through time and reincarnations, and we meet up and we appear to be mother and son, but actually we're two souls headed in, ultimately back home, back to Godhead. But, this was kind of the way that it all worked out. Krishna made that arrangement so that some of my last interactions with my mother wouldn't have had such a negative overtone to them, And, of course, about a year later, my sister called me and asked, or told me that my mother was in a very serious health condition, and she had some pneumonia, that she might not make it. So I flew all the way from New York to Missouri, where my mother was staying. And when I got there, she was kind of in a sort of a coma of some kind or another. There were all these machines and everything. I spent about 3 or 4 days with my sister. My mother never came out of that, sort of coma. And then, because I had to do something, I flew back to New York. So when I got back here, my sister called me and said, strangely enough, right after I left, my mother appeared to have a complete recovery. That she got over the pneumonia. They released her from the ICU, and she went back to the place where she was being cared for Alzheimer's. And 2 days later, she died. So kind of, one of those bizarre sequences of things. So, in general, I can see why people would try to make some arrangements for their family members, particularly their mothers or their fathers in some cases. My sister seemed to do the best thing that was possible, and at the time, I didn't see any reason in why I needed to be any more present than I was. And since my father worked for the government, there was a pension, so it was paying for her everything that she did. My sister visited her quite often. So it seemed like that was taken care of. That's how it worked in my own particular case. But still, some devotees, I think, make a particular individual effort, whereas others just allow things to take whatever course they're going to take. So in this case, that's just how it worked for me.
Thank you for sharing that. I was just reminded of another more recent case of devotee kids taking care of their their father just on, was it Saturday or was it Friday? I think it was Friday. A couple of devotees I knew from Alachua, Naveen Sharma and Krishna-Priya, came to Harinam, and they brought his father in a wheelchair because he was, his wife passed away like around the time of the Philly Rath Yatra, not too long ago, and so they're taking care of his father. He's just living with them in Harrisburg, where they're living and performing devotional service. So that's another case of having the family member live with the devotees toward the end of life. And of course, they get so much prasadam and they get so much spiritual associations. That's very, that he went to in his wheelchair, he went to the Philly Rath Yatra, and he wanted to pull the cart, So they facilitated him. They pulled the wheelchair up to the rope and let him hold on to the rope. I have a picture in my blog of him pulling the cart. Yeah. You had a question, somebody?
Yeah. I just have one reflection and then one question. So my reflection is appreciating that whenever you begin Krishna consciousness, begins like spiritual life, one of the symptoms I feel like is really developing this compassion, and suddenly start seeing that anybody who's miserable, anybody who's suffering, you start to feel their pain. And so I was just reflecting in this verse that it's talking about protection. And Krishna is even saying these defenseless creatures are part of my body. And so if we are developing that compassion, then naturally we'll take whatever circumstance we have, whatever body we're born in, or whatever money we have, or whatever advantages we have, we'll use that, use whatever strengths we have to provide that protection and try to help people get to Krishna. And that is the physical manifestation of compassion, is that we're trying to do what we can to help. And so I was appreciating that, and how Krishna was saying that defenseless creatures are part of my body. So if we see, and we're not making that distinction, we see children and women and old, men and the brahmanas and the cows, and we're seeing like this is part of Krishna. This is Krishna's property. What can I do to protect that and like really preserve that and have that mood? I was just really appreciating that. And then my question is that it's interesting that it's talking about brahmanas being defenseless. And here we're practicing Krishna consciousness, and we're trying very hard to, we might not by nature be brahmanas, but we're trying to develop brahminical qualities. And we're trying to raise to that platform. So in that sense, since we're trying to develop those qualities, does that mean we are becoming defenseless?
Well, there's different things. Traditionally, actually there's a really super nice section I would quote if I had the electronic device, which I could call it up with me. But there's a nice section where Kardama Muni meets Swayambhuva Manu. And the Muni praises the glory of the ideal Kshatriya, which Swayambhuva Manu is, and the Manu praises the glory of the ideal Brahmana, who Kardama Muni is. And basically, it comes out in that way that the Supreme Lord protects each of them through the other. He protects the Kshatriya through the Brahmana by giving him knowledge, and he protects the Brahmana through the Kshatriya by giving physical protection from harm. So, because the duty of one of the duties of the Brahmana is ahimsa, non-violence. He doesn't have, weapons to protect himself, but the Kshatriya's weapons are meant to protect him, like that. But we also know that one of the most wonderful leelas in the Bhāgavatam is the pastime of Prahlad Maharaj. And Prahlad Maharaj is famous for attaining perfection in devotional service through remembering the Supreme Lord of the 9 different items. So simply because he always remembered Krishna, even though his father tried to kill him by boiling him in ghee and throwing him off a mountain and having him trampled by elephants and having him poisoned, he was protected by Krishna in every respect. So ultimately the Brahmanas are protected by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and the pure devotees are protected by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But the human society are supposed to protect them in different ways, and the Kshatriyas are supposed to protect them from physical harm. And the other people are supposed to give in charity to the Brahmanas and help protect them by giving them their livelihood, and in exchange for the enlightenment, you know. In the Varnashram system, everyone gives someone something and everyone gets something. The Brahmanas give knowledge, they get charity. The Kshatriyas give protection and engagement, and they get tax revenue. The Vaishyas provide goods and services, and they get the price for their products. And the Shudras provide labor, and they get a place to stay, some food to eat, and some clothes to wear. So the Brahmanas are, although they're seen as defenseless, they're actually defended by Krishna ultimately. And the highest, most elevated ones are completely fearless, because they, just like as a child, if a child is with his father, he can be fearless because he knows if any harm comes, my father will take care of me. Because the elevated souls, they experience the presence of the Lord at every moment. For them, their Father is there. And not just an ordinary Father, but the Supreme Father. Like the Hiranyakashipu said, "Is he in this pillar?" And Prahlad Maharaj says, "Yes." And then he manifests. So they're actually they're experiencing the presence of the Lord at every moment. So they don't, Prahlad didn't bother to pray for protection, but he was experiencing that his protector was fully qualified and always present, so he didn't have to worry. And then he proved that by protecting him in different ways. So these classes tend to go on, but it's time for prasadam, so we're going to end here. Thank you for your kind attention. It's Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki. Time.